Life's too short to drive boring cars. Hey, have you been shopping for a new car lately? Obviously, prices are very, very high, so you start looking at the used car market. They're high as well. But if you've been shopping and it's used and you wonder if there's any problems with that engine, you can do some basic checks to make sure that you don't buy a dud. Conversely, maybe you've got your old vehicle and you're wondering it's starting to make strange noises, there's been some changes, and you wonder if finally the engine is on its last legs. You're starting to wonder, maybe I should buy a new vehicle. I'm going to share with you 4 signs that the engine under the hood may be on its way out. Let's get into it now. So let's start the ignition of this old Dodge pickup. See, there's noises. What do you think that is? So you can get a lot of different engine noises. As you heard there, you can get sometimes things called piston slap. Sometimes that's just too much wear and tear on the piston to cylinder tolerances, and you can get a little bit of movement in the piston and the cylinder bore. And sometimes that comes with wear and tear, and sometimes even forged pistons by design are a little sloppy because there's allowances by the manufacturer. As they heat up, they will tighten up. So you got to know your engine, and you have to know if that's a problem or not, but piston slap is a potential noisemaker. Another one, of course, is the bottom end, the rod bearings. Obviously, you guys have heard a lot of the recalls lately with Hyundai and Kia with the bottom end. So the rod bearings coming apart at the seams, overheating, and engines are catching fire. It's a pretty big problem, I would say. So you want to hear that knocking noise, or you don't want to hear that, because ultimately that's a sign that you've got something majorly developing. If it's not already failed, it's developed. What you'll notice there is as you rev the engine, you'll get that kind of, it'll follow the pace of the engine. So that often does indicate bottom end problems. You can also get lifter, rocker noises, push rod noises, depending on the style of engine, top end drivetrain. These are the parts that actuate the valves. As those parts, as they actuate the valves up and down, up and down, up and down, they start to develop wear and tear, and you sometimes develop excess wear and you get ticking noises. Now that doesn't mean the engine's ready to go boom, but it does mean that the engine is seeing some significant wear underneath the hood. Now the next sign that there could be something brewing with your engine and it might be on its way out has to do with the fluids. So you want to make sure that all the fluids are as they should be. Let's take a look. So there's a few things you have to check with fluids. Number one is your engine oil. So you want to pull that out and you want to make sure that the dipstick is reading within the range. And sudden drastic changes in the level. If you've got the range here and all of a sudden 2 days later you've got fluid level showing this height, that could be an indicator of a significant issue. Of course as well here, engine oil, that's where you would fill it. So sometimes it doesn't hurt to unspin that and you'll look underneath the cap. And if you see frothing under the cap, what that could mean is blow-by. Blow-by could mean an indicator of piston rings. Your compression rings are starting to let fluid by, and obviously there's fluid and liquid and gases that alter between both sides of the rings, and of course that can ultimately create a frothing, and sometimes you'll find that under the bottom of that lid. Frothing means bad. Sometimes a little bit of froth isn't the worst thing. It sometimes means a lot of condensation. Condensation could be a result of very cold weather, warming up engine. You might see a little bit of that frothing in normal wear and tear, but generally speaking, when the weather is decent, you shouldn't really see any of that frothing. That could be an indicator of blow-by. Now, this engine here happens to be a 4.7 liter V8. This is a Magnum Dodge engine. And of course, you're looking at coolant. This is a strong indicator as to the problems that your engine might see. Now, as you can see, this is actually slightly low. That's the cool level. Obviously, the fluid should be up. So it's probably got a marginal leak. This was topped up about 6 months ago. It is slightly dissipated. Now, there is some natural ventilation that goes through the atmosphere. However, never want to see too much coolant going away. That could mean a number of things. Where would your coolant be going? Well, it could be leaking it out of your radiator, hoses, water pumps, thermostats, any number of places it could actually be leaking on the ground. The other unfortunate part is it could actually be burning it. How would it burn it? Well, it could be making its way into the internal combustion chamber, i.e. typically identified as a burnt head gasket. If you have a blown head gasket, that usually means several $1,000s of work to get that fixed. So you never want to see drastic shifts in your coolant levels. Now, this is being a gas engine. I will comment on a diesel. If this was a diesel engine, I have actually seen where this level has risen, or you see a separation where you all of a sudden see diesel separated and you see coolant, you'll see a definitive line, but then you'll get a strong odor of diesel coming out of there. Now that's personally happened to me. I had a Ford Power Stroke. That was a 7.3 liter diesel many years ago, and that happened. What they have is the injectors. The injectors are mounted. There's a strong cup around it that holds it into the head. But what ends up happening, and it's a known issue, the injector cup can crack. If it cracks, you can wind up with fuel migrating into the coolant. If you get that, you'll definitely get a strong, odd raw diesel smell under the hood, and you'll often see that layering going on in the radiator expansion tank. Right in there. In addition, if all of a sudden you see a massive increase in your oil level via dipstick, that can also be an indicator that you're putting coolant into your engine oil, which obviously could be a problem. You could also wind up with fuel in your oil, and that will increase the level as well. That's a bad scene. That's fuel dilution. You wind up with too much fuel getting pumped into the cylinders. It gets by the piston rings because it's washing the cylinder walls. It can no longer develop compression, and that gas winds up down below in the oil compartment. And unfortunately, in the sump is where you don't want to have gas. That's bad. It's dangerous, and B, gasoline essentially is a solvent. So a solvent will clean the cylinder walls, which is bad. It will also dilute the oil, break down the oil, and you'll have less lubrication. That can lead to a catastrophic engine failure. Have any of you heard of the Honda issues and the 1.5 liter turbo oil dilution problems? I rest my case. So the third sign you may have an imminent engine failure is what's coming out of the tailpipe. And there's your exhaust pipe. Obviously, any number of things can be coming out of there. Typically, it should be nothing. In normal operating condition, you really shouldn't see anything here. Why? Because upstream there you have carbon emissions are filtered and scrubbed with your catalytic converter. But on other days, sometimes if you see white smoke coming out of here, white smoke billowing, especially under acceleration, that could mean a blown head gasket. And we spoke of head gaskets already, and that's a serious problem, very, very costly issue to fix. If you see white exhaust, that's an indicator of a blown head gasket. If you see strong black coming out of here, that's too much fuel, way too rich. Often there's issues with the way the vehicle's running. Maybe there's a problem with compression, too much fueling, not enough air. And then you wind up with this. That also could be an indicator of an excess tune. A lot of vehicles nowadays are tuned up to provide more power. More power means more fuel. More fuel, often you see it coming out here in excess. So black smoke is usually a bad indicator. Now blue smoke, on the other hand, is the really bad one. Because blue smoke usually is an indication that the engine is burning oil. Oil has that really nasty, pungent odor. And of course, that's the sign, sure sign, symptom that you're consuming oil. If you're consuming oil, that's bad. That usually means your oil control ring or certain levels of compression rings are worn out or all of the above. What ends up happening is the oil from below in the sump gets splashed up, but your pistons don't have enough seal and the oil is getting above the piston and it's starting to consume and burn that oil. When burning oil happens, you'll find blue coming out of the exhaust. A lot of times, blue can happen on a startup. That could be bad valve guides. You could also see excess blue on deceleration. So under load, you're cruising down a hill and you lift off the throttle, but the vehicle is actually engine braking. That's where often you'll see blue smoke. That's also an indicator that you're pulling through your valve guides, and valve guide seals could be an indicator of consuming oil as well, or it could be another point of leak. At the end of the day, blue exhaust is bad. So the fourth sign that something is majorly going wrong with your engine could in fact be misfire. Now often misfires are not a big deal. Often misfires could be as simple as a bad spark plug, a bad coil, could even be bad wiring, possibly even be the module that controls all the firing. There could be any number of relatively simple fixes, but often misfires can result from other things that are much more serious. Let's take a look. Sometimes misfires are pretty simple. You get spark plugs, and you get the spark plugs, you get ignition coils, you could even have a bad fuel injector, or possibly a control module that fires all of that equipment. But I personally had a story once. Years ago, I bought this old piece of junk Dodge, and it was not this. I bought this old junky Plymouth Horizon. Ugly car, got it for cheap. The current owner said, hey, you know what? It has a bit of a misfire. He said all it needed was a tune-up. Famous last words. Never take that person's word for it, guys. I'm going to share that with you right now. If they say it needs a tune-up, they would have just done the tune-up. Think about that for a second. It's not a tune-up. It means the engine is shot. And that's what ended up happening. So I bought this Chrysler on somebody's word, drove it home, changed the spark plugs, coils, did all of that good stuff, still had a misfire. Then I decided to do a compression check. Pull the spark plugs out one at a time, spun in the compression tester, cranked the engine a few times, built compression. Well, guess what? It was a 4-cylinder engine, 3 cylinders were shooting at about 175 psi. The other cylinder was sitting at about 70 psi. I had a hole. In other words, there was a bad piston. Either a piston, a ring, or a valve was burnt. And there was a hole, and essentially the car could not build compression on that cylinder. Hence, it had a rough idle. So never take a misfire for some rotten, untrustworthy salesperson. Because ultimately, if it's as simple as a tune-up, they probably would have tuned it up themselves, right? And with all of that said, maybe you're shopping for a new or used car. Be sure to check out that video. That's going to share with you the top 10 vehicles that will last over 300,000 miles. Hope to catch you guys real soon. See you then. Bye-bye.